Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Esoteric Literacy. Today we'll be trying to cover the topic of free will and fate, and the difference between the two. Now I have to put a disclaimer on, because I usually like to speak from my own experience with these esoteric topics, but I'm only in my mid-30s, so I don't have an overabundance of experience with destiny or fate or anything like that. Maybe in 40 years I'll make another video and let you know how much of my life unfolded in terms of free will or in terms of fate. So for now I can just tell you about what I've studied on the topic, some good resources you can look into yourselves, how I've synthesized this information, and some of my experiences, my limited experiences of my, 30 plus years on this earth. But like free will and fate. Free will versus fate versus destiny or determinism. This is a question that a lot of philosophers ask, especially when you get into spirituality and things like that. You start to ask this very fundamental question: how much of my life is predetermined? Is everything predetermined? Do I have free will? Is everything free will? Is everything chaos and therefore everything is free? Or is everything predetermined and controlled? Is there wiggle room between the two? And we have mythologies about fate and destiny, especially in the Greek era. We have modern scientists and philosophers who are very much into the idea of determinism, and that everything was set in motion at the Big Bang and it was all determined. What was going to happen was determined by the first explosion of molecules into the cosmos, and it's just a continuation of that predetermined trajectory. Everything that exists is just a continuation of that predetermined trajectory. And people who think about this want to know about it. They want to know what the answer is for practical reasons. How do you plan your life? What do you plan for your life? How do you formulate your desires and goals and things like that? When you start really thinking about what kind of goals are worthwhile in my life, you start to wonder, how much is predetermined? How much effort should I put in? How much effort shouldn't I put in? What am I meant to do? What is my purpose? All that sort of stuff is wrapped up in this question of free will versus determinism. It's a very fundamental question that most people will eventually ask themselves, and whether or not they stick with the question is up to the person. This was a question that I had when I was quite young, and by the time I was in my 20s, I kind of stopped caring about this question, and I read everything you could possibly read on the subject because I was obsessed with it when I was a teenager. And I realized that there are, the different ways of looking at it are only important depending on what type of emotional state you wish to have at a certain moment. If believing you have free will is important, or if believing everything is determined is important, for your emotional well-being, then there's this practical application of these different points of view depending on the point you are in your life and what type of emotional state you want to experience. And if you practice Stoicism enough and you stop caring about your emotional state, or not that you stop caring about it, but you achieve a sort of equanimity of all things, then the question becomes less important to you. But that doesn't mean that it's still not a question. What is real? What is free will and what is determined? So I guess I'm just going to share the ideas that I've come across, the ones that I think are the most useful ideas, and I'll come at it from different perspectives that are essentially mutually exclusive, and you can synthesize them however you want, or you can research them further and come to your own conclusions about it. But I'll start with my opinions, and that's my views essentially line up with Gurdjieff, or George Gurdjieff. He was a 19th to 20th century occultist and guru. He had some disciples, and he shared a lot of his ideas of what the human being is and what spiritual discipline is and how to become a master occultist and to conquer your lower nature and to become more free. That was essentially his goal. And he believed or taught that most human beings are essentially stimulus response machines. I think B.F. Skinner, I could be wrong about this, but I believe it was B.F. Skinner who coined the term behaviorism, or at least he developed the idea in a popular book from the 20th century called Behaviorism. And he wrote in this book, I forget what it was called, B.F. Skinner's most famous book, I can't remember what it's called, that human beings are just machines, or like robots. They can be programmed with stimulus, and then they have a predictable response depending on, their dispositions. And he believed that essentially all humans are the same. As most Darwinists, modern liberals, industrialists, atheists tend to believe that all human beings are equal, all human beings are the same and have the same dispositions, and therefore, his ideas were used for the science of government, for propaganda, for programming and controlling large populations of people to make them easily manageable for governments and large businesses. Those were the people who basically benefited from B.F. Skinner's ideas, were corporations and advertisers and governments and lawmakers who began to view people as robots that you could program. Gurdjieff kind of had this idea, but it was people are programmable robots that just react to stimuli, predictably, to the extent that they are not spiritually free. So there's a gradation of freedom from total robot, just stimulus response machine, unthinking. Stimulus comes into you and you respond to it and you go through life that way, and up to absolute freedom, where you are no longer a machine reacting to stimulus, but you have total control over your life and even some of your surroundings. And there's a gradient between those two states. And so people can be anywhere between these two states. And through self-control, self-observation, self-awareness practice, you increase your freedom. You notice how you are being stimulated from your environment, from your thoughts, from your feelings, how you're reacting to your environment with thoughts and feelings, or how you're reacting to your thoughts with feelings, or how you're reacting to your feelings with thoughts, and so on. You gather this collection of observations about yourself through disciplined self-observation. And the more you do that, the more free you become, because you see how you are like a machine being stimulated from your environment and how you're responding to these stimulations, these stimuli. And then you can decide eventually how you want to react to these stimuli. This is essentially the heart of Stoicism, but Gurdjieff calls it self-observation training. And when you have enough observations, oh my God, I should have put myself on the solar panels. See, this is the electrical grid in the United States. You see this? You see this flashing? I'm going to give you guys a freaking seizure. Forgive the horrible electrical grid on the east coast of the US. I'm normally on solar panels, but it's been super cloudy and my batteries are dead. Anyway, I hope the flashing lights don't bother you that much. But the more self-observations you gain, you can have like a journal of them. Like, oh, when I see this, I react emotionally this way. I have these thoughts. When I have this thought, I react this way. Keep a whole journal and notice it. And you can begin to decide how you want to react, or even if you want to react. And you gain freedom. At least you gain control over yourself. And you gain freedom from the emotions you don't want to feel. You gain freedom from the thoughts you don't want to have. And when you begin to gain this freedom from the emotions and thoughts you don't want to have, or to regulate your emotions and thoughts in the way you want, you gain more agency in your life. And, you know, people equate freedom with agency. The more agency you have, the more freedom you have. The more freedom you have, the more possibility for agency you have. And so the more self-control you have, the more of both of these. And this was essentially what Gurdjieff was trying to teach his students, was to have complete self-control over body, mind, emotions, soul, spirit, and that would have you elevate through these levels of what he referred to as the laws of the universe. And the lower you are in the universe, the more physical and dense you are, the more laws that you are subject to. And the higher you go in these dimensions of reality, from gross material reality to spiritual reality, these different realms, these higher realms, are subject to fewer and fewer laws, up to the point where there is just the law, what people call God or Source or Tao or whatever you want to call it. I believe William Walker Atkinson refers to it as the law in his book known as The Four Arcanes. I think I have that right here. Yeah. So, is that going to focus on that? Yeah, William Walker Atkinson, The Four Arcanes. It's a pretty good book. He also describes what Gurdjieff was talking about, that there is the law, which governs all of reality, spiritual reality, physical reality. It's the source of all things. And some people call it Tao or God or whatever. He calls it the law. And then when you get to like a high spiritual realm, there's just a handful of laws. Then a grosser spiritual realm, there's a few more laws that all those entities are subject to, and so on and so on. And when you get down into the earth realm, I think Gurdjieff says we're subject to 48 laws. I don't know where he came up with these numbers. You can find that in P.D. Ouspensky's book. If you know who P.D. Ouspensky is, he was a student of Gurdjieff, and he wrote a book about Gurdjieff called In Search of the Miraculous. This is probably the best book on Gurdjieff's teachings that you'll find published. And it goes into this idea of free will and stimulus response machines and all that. There's another book by William Patterson called Voices in the Dark. It was when Gurdjieff I think he spent World War II in Paris, France. I think Gurdjieff was in Paris, France, and during the occupation of France, and William Patterson wrote a book that's just filled with Gurdjieff quotes and stuff like that. It's also filled with like random other people's, like the heroes of World War II, and filled with quotes of that. But William Patterson really only cared about Gurdjieff. He was a student of Gurdjieff, and the book Voices in the Dark is marketed as a World War II book about the great Western heroes of World War II, but that's kind of false marketing, because 90% of it is Gurdjieff quotes of him just yelling at his students that they're bad students. But anyway, there's a lot of direct quotes from Gurdjieff himself, which are very useful. But William Patterson's kind of a Gurdjieff fanatic, and it comes off as kind of like a cult member worshiping his guru, and that book is kind of annoying, but it is filled with direct quotes, which is excellent. So if you can get through the annoying commentary and just get to the quotes, every page has maybe 3 to 10 quotes on it. And another great source, Voices in the Dark by William Patterson. Anyway, those are really the only 2 books that you're going to find that actually lay out Gurdjieff's teachings, because the rest of the books about Gurdjieff or written by Gurdjieff himself are really, really bad. They're just stupid books filled with nonsense. I don't know why books about him and written by him they're just such a waste of time to read. Those are the only 2 that I found out of the 100 books about this guy. But anyway, he believes that you are subject to more and more laws the lower you are in the sort of cosmic hierarchy, the realms of the dimensions of the cosmic hierarchy, and that there are realms lower than the Earth realm, where you're subject to like 96 laws in the realm beneath the Earth realm, the very dense, gross, I guess like 2-dimensional realm or something like that. And the beings there are They have like very little freedom, very little free will. And the accounts of Gurdjieff's life is that he was like a real master occultist. He could bilocate, meaning he could be in more than one place, at least two places at the same time. You know, a student of his left on a train, and Gurdjieff like appeared on that train when it was like 30 miles away and told him he like forgot his wallet or something. I can't remember what he said to him, but he was like, you forgot your wallet back at the place you came from. And there are a lot of stories about Gurdjieff's occult powers, you know, what in Sanskrit are known as siddhis, special occult powers that allow you to have more freedom, like walking on water, healing sick and handicapped people, bilocating. You know, these things obviously give you a great deal of freedom. Transmutation of materials into other materials, and so on and so forth. So if those accounts of Gurdjieff are true, then clearly this guy knew what he was talking about when it comes to evolving your free will and having more power over your surroundings and your own life. So that is kind of what I think is true, that your life and your reality are deterministic to the extent that you are spiritually unfree. So the more spiritually free you are, the more freedom you have, the less determined your life is. But that's not really the question of fate or destiny. Fate and destiny has to do with an individual and their effect on the world, or their effect on society, their purpose in life. And now it involves other people and historical processes and the future of a society. And this brings me to a different perspective, which I don't really agree with. I partially agree with it and partially disagree with it, but it's today's mainstream historical theory, like the modern Western historical theory, is known as the great man theory, which great individuals do something that determine what happens in society. So we have great men like, you know, George Washington or John D. Rockefeller, or, you know, whoever. You know, think of some great, what we call great, not necessarily good as in morally good, but great as in what they did was huge. And that these people determine what happens in society. And so this theory says that a few individuals have a great amount of freedom and everybody else just kind of is subject to what these great men want to happen. And this is the dominant theory of the modern Western academic historical ideology, the great man theory, as opposed to the more Russian theories of Cliodynamics or historical dynamics or socio-historical dynamics, which is a more mathematical and scientific approach to history, which deals with mechanisms of history and large populations and how things unfold naturally, how civilizations are like organisms that are born, grow, live, decline, and die. And so from the Russian perspective, there's not a lot of emphasis on free will, and from the modern Western perspective, there's emphasis on the free will of just select elite individuals, and everybody else has to do what they say. And my views kind of mix the two together. I agree with people like Peter Turchin and Piotr Sorokin and who else? Is it Nikolai Danielewski? Well, anyway, these Russian historical theorists who look at large populations and large periods of time and how there's like a universal history, how most civilizations go through certain things at certain times, and that civilizations are not necessarily unique. They are unique organisms, but they are not unique in their life cycles the way all humans are born, grow, and live, reach a peak of health and fitness, start getting old and sick, and then die. Every single organism does this, and so do civilizations. And a human being goes through certain things at certain time as well. It's like every 7 years we hit these certain pubic cycles and there's all these different cycles that occur at different times in essentially every normal, healthy human being's life. And these are predictable time periods and predictable moments in the development and decline of an organism. And Russian historical theorists have discovered this about civilizations. And so that kind of diminishes the amount of free will that large populations have, which is in line with Gurdjieff's idea that most people are stimulus response machines. But the Western view of history, well, yeah, you have a guy like John D. Rockefeller who started building railroad tracks, and Vanderbilt or whoever. They started industrializing, decided to start burning coal, building big metal machines, and this sort of thing. It was sort of like their idea to start doing this when no one really had done it before, at least not in America. And they kind of had this free will to do this and change the shape of American civilization. Now, were they predetermined to do that, as like modern physicists would argue? Maybe, I don't know. But it was... It's the idea that these are just a small number of people. It's not like everybody got together at the same time and decided to start building railroad tracks. It was just a handful of guys who were like, I want to build railroad tracks so that I can sell more stuff and travel more quickly. And they got their money together and did it. And so what is the balance here? What exactly was free about those choices and what were determined by other historical mechanisms that we haven't identified yet? The Russian historical theorists have created mathematical models that can predict when a new technological breakthrough is going to happen, when a new civil war or revolution is going to happen, when a government is going to collapse, or when a government is going to reform certain laws and aspects of itself, when an economy is going to do this or when an economy is going to do that. They've been predicting these things since the 1980s, or since like 1979, all the way up to today with like 81% accuracy. They've been predicting all of these things just with the mathematical models that they developed from the 1870s up to the 1970s. And they're continuing to develop these mathematical models today. And I think they have like an 81% hit rate with their predictions. But they don't understand what these mechanisms are. They've studied enough history to be able to apply the mathematical models to history, to develop a mathematical model and say, well, when the population reaches this and the economy reaches this, then this variable and that, and then this will happen. But they don't know why. They can explain it with mathematics and predict it with mathematics, but they don't know what the mechanisms are that make these things happen. Like, why is a technological breakthrough about to happen here? Is it because there's a certain population density and certain types of learning going? Like, they don't know. What made the population so dense there? Why is this certain university here? Why is this particular type of technological breakthrough happening at this particular time? These mechanisms are mysterious. And this is where it ties into Rudolf Steiner and Francis Yaki's ideas that cultures have like an oversoul, and that there are spiritual impulses that make cultures do certain things at certain times. They're like archangels that rule over a group of people, right? And these archangels send spiritual impulses into human minds and get humans to do certain things. Like, you have the idea of spontaneous invention, where there are like a bunch of people who invented the light bulb within the same year, even though they're all isolated around the world. And a bunch of people who invented the cotton gin within a few month period. And you have all these, we call it spontaneous, simultaneous invention, but I don't necessarily think it's spontaneous. There must be a cause as to why multiple people are doing the same thing at the same time, even though they're separated by distance. And I've experienced it in my own life, and I tried to meditate on it and understand the mechanism behind it. But I was writing a series of short stories, and it was about like, in the near future, this is just a sci-fi story. Sorry for the digression, but maybe this will spark something and you'll see. But this was years ago. And I was writing some short stories, like there's the Earth, Mars, and the asteroid belt, and these were three separate like societies. You know, Mars and the asteroid belt had been colonized, and the people in the asteroid belt had essentially become enslaved by Earth and Mars. They're like really hard labor, doing hard labor mining asteroids and stuff so that they could build up Martian civilization, who were trying to make Mars a nice livable world. And the Martians were very militaristic, and they were taking resources from the Earth and the belt. And so there's this political conflict, and the Earth was like really decadent, and there's just rich people living in luxury and eating pharmaceuticals and antidepressants and stuff like that, and they're just like a super happy, rich, decadent world. Mars was very hard and frontiersman, and then the belt was like basically Soviet slave camps in space. And so there's like a war, a three-way war brewing, all these political tensions. And then there was like a weird robot AI alien invasion that was going to kind of just hit them sideways. And then a guy was going to figure out how to unite the three different, you know, Earth, Mars, and the belt against this weird AI alien threat. And that was a series of short stories I was writing. And while I was writing this story, a television show called The Expanse came out on the Sci-Fi Channel. And it is literally the exact same story. And then I read a story about a guy who was writing a sci-fi novel who was trying to sue the guys who made The Expanse because he believed that they had somehow hacked his computer and stole his sci-fi story, because he was also writing the same story. So there were three of us writing the exact same sci-fi story at the exact same time. It's very weird. Anyway, I couldn't figure out why I meditated on it. I tried to find it, like what I was tuned into and plugged into at that time that I was writing these stories. I couldn't discover the source of it. I don't know, I couldn't meditate that deeply on it, I guess. I just failed in that regard. But there's some type of mechanism that creates spontaneous, simultaneous invention. So that diminishes the idea of free will. I obviously wasn't writing this story completely on my own free will, and neither were these other two sci-fi writers. We were all tuned into the same thing, and we all got inspired to sit down and start writing the same thing at the same time. So what does that mean for free will? I don't know. It seems to diminish the idea. If I had more self-awareness and knew where the impulse to write this story came from, could I have decided not to write it? Could I have ignored my inspiration? These positive feelings, ooh, I want to sit down and write, this is fun, this is cool. Would I have wanted to get rid of those fun, inspiring feelings? It was rewarding. You know, when you get inspired and you want to create something, it's fun and nice feeling. So why would I, what would my incentive be to ignore the fun, inspiring feelings and suppress them and not write the story? Because it's like, no, I want to be free, so I will suppress this emotion of happiness that I'm getting from this inspiration. Is that in my best interest to suppress that just for the sake of being free? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. This is for you to think about for yourself. I'm just offering an anecdote, and you decide what's right for you and what isn't. If suppressing happiness in order to be free is important for you, then do it. But if happiness comes from inspiration, which is coming from some unknown source, and that unknown source just wants this story to get out there, this sci-fi story, whatever impulse, whatever cosmic force was making the three of us write this story, that wanted it to come into existence, wanted this story to manifest, should I deny that source, its manifestation, simply because I want to be free? Or should I go with the source? And is that an exercise of freedom? If I knew it was spontaneous and simultaneous invention and decided to go with it anyway, is that free will? Or I didn't know at the time, so I was not free to ignore it for the sake of freedom. I indulged it for the sake of feeling creative. And I was rewarded with a sense of creativity. And it was fun. So sometimes you get rewarded for going with these spiritual impulses, which are rooted in a diminishment of your freedom. This is more determined, but sometimes you get rewarded with feelings of inspiration and happiness and satisfaction. So what is right and what is wrong? Don't know. How important is freedom? How important is happiness? I don't know. These are qualifications of values that you have to determine for yourself. I'm not going to tell you what you should and should not do. But just strive to be aware. Try and find where that source of inspiration is coming from, and then decide what you want to do from that point on. And then, of course, how much is determined. You can look at philosophers like Daniel Dennett and these people who are complete atheists, believe there's no such thing as a soul. Everything is just chemical reactions in the brain, and the Big Bang set a bunch of molecules into space, that everything's determined now, and everything's 100% determined. And I don't really have much comment on that, other than it seems extremely cynical. And a lot of Daniel Dennett's philosophy is rooted in modern neuroscience. And so I wanted to briefly touch upon neuroscience, because I was in correspondence with 2 neuroscientists in my early 20s. And I used to drive them nuts. I think I've probably mentioned them in a video before, but I used to drive them nuts with questions, with just the simplest questions, and that they couldn't answer. And I wanted to see what they would say and have discussions about it. And I would ask these neuroscientists, who basically the brain was their god. They worship the brain as though it is God, and that the brain controls everything in reality. And I would just ask them a simple question: how is it that I can reach out and pick up this pen? Using my will, my volition, I commanded my arm to reach out, and then I commanded my fingers to grasp this pen, and then commanded my body to bring it within view of the camera. It was my will, my intent to do that. So I would ask the neuroscientist, what is will? What is volition? And one of them got really angry because he was flustered and couldn't answer. And then the other one just quietly stopped talking to me. They both eventually stopped talking to me after a year of me knowing them. They eventually just cut me out of their lives because they could never answer my questions, and they believed I was the ignorant one. They're the ones not answering questions. All I'm doing is asking questions, and they thought I was wrong for simply asking questions, or that I didn't understand what was going on. But what the hell is will? It's the most fundamental aspect of a human being, is your will to do something. I'm going to adjust my shirt real quick. I chose to do that. How? What is that? Define will. Psychologists, neurosurgeons, behavioralists, these people, none of them have a definition of what will is, of what the mind is, or of what emotions and feelings are. We all know that we experience them. We experience them every moment of every day. Our mind, our will, and our feelings. We have them. We know we have them. It's impossible to deny having these 3 things. And we know that putting them in line, your thinking, your feeling, and your willing, when they're in line, you live a very good, healthy, well-adjusted life. Any psychologist will agree with that. When your thinking, your feeling, and your willing are harmonized and in line with each other and don't contradict each other, you live a relatively happy and healthy life. But modern people cannot define what these 3 things are. No one knows what the mind is. There's no definition for it. No one knows what emotions are. There's no definition for those. No one knows what will is. There's no definition for that. But we use them all the time. So when you ask what free will is, what is free will? Do you even know what will is? How can you know the difference between free will and regular will, or determined will, if you don't even know what will is? So that's my issue with this kind of question. That's why I sort of just gave up in my 20s and stopped caring, because I think it's just important to go through the steps. And like I said, I'm only in my mid-30s. So go through the steps of collecting self-observations until the point you realize where your reactions are coming from. And then you can tackle this idea of will and free will to understand what will is. To find your will, to meditate on it and find the origin of will is an extraordinarily high level of enlightenment to actually see the level of will and what it really is within your being is such a high level of enlightenment that if you can see that, you're like an ascended master, basically. If you know what will is, you are up there. And not many people are up there. It's like 0.00001% of any given generation is going to know what will is. So like I said at the beginning of the video, maybe in 40 years I'll make another video and tell you how much, like what will is and how much destiny affected my life, how much free will affected my life. And for now we can reflect on the stories of the heroes and their call to adventure. You know, Joseph Campbell and his hero's journey, the mythological hero's journey. You get called to adventure, the hero ignores the call, but it doesn't matter if you ignore the call, it's going to force you into the adventure anyway. Carl Jung agreed with this. You know, he believed that the archetypes of humanity are these real spiritual entities that can control your life, and they will one day, no matter what. You're going to be controlled by an archetype that you give yourself to or that you're disposed to, and it will to an extent determine what you do with your life. And so that's a very Nordic and Greek way of looking at it, that you don't have much will. You get taken over by these spiritual entities. And Rudolf Steiner falls in between this sort of Jungian Nordic Greek Joseph Campbell idea and Gurdjieff's idea of freedom evolving. And Steiner says that like in the past we had this atavistic, meaning primordial, primitive sense of clairvoyance where we could see the gods everywhere. And, you know, when Achilles was going to kill Agamemnon in the Iliad? No. Was it the Iliad? Or the Aeneid? It was the Iliad. And Agamemnon was about to be killed by Achilles, and Athena grabbed Achilles' wrists. It wasn't Achilles who decided not to kill Agamemnon. He was going to do it, but Athena stopped him. Athena appeared out of the spiritual world and grabbed his wrist, stopped him from killing Agamemnon. And this was like this ancient form of clairvoyance where the gods lived amongst us and like kind of controlled us. And then we lost that spiritual vision and became extremely subject to just material vision. But this gives us a chance to exercise freedom because we can't see the gods and we can't see the laws of karma unfolding. So this is a very important point. We don't know if the laws of karma are real or not. The ancient rishis knew karma was real because they had this atavistic clairvoyance and they could see, if I do something nice for this person, there's this spiritual reaction that occurs and I get rewarded for it. If I hurt this person or do something evil to this person, I can see the spiritual reaction occur and I get punished for it. And they literally were able to see it. Like I can see gravity. I can pick up a pen and drop the pen. And it's like, yes, I can see the law of gravity. No one needs to make me believe in gravity. I can feel it pulling my body toward the surface of the earth. You know, I don't have to believe in it. It's simply there. And that was this atavistic sense of clairvoyance. Karma, to the ancients, was not a belief. It was a perceivable reality. And this is why they behaved properly in these ancient and classical traditional civilizations, because they knew, like, we know you don't jump off a cliff. The law of gravity will kill you. They knew you don't, stab that guy out of anger because the law of karma is going to screw you over in the future. And so were they really good people? Or were they just not jumping off of a cliff because they knew about gravity? You know what I mean? So now that we can't see the laws of karma, or the gods, we decide to be nice to other people because we think it's the right thing to do. So now we have the freedom to be good or evil, to be truly good or truly evil, to be selfless or selfish, or any mixture on that spectrum. And that's an exercise in freedom. What do you want to do? How do you want to live your life? Do you want to get rich at the expense of others? Or are you going to accept poverty because you don't want to steal from others or take advantage of others? Or, are you going to control your anger when that person pisses you off? Or are you going to harm them or get revenge on them? These are choices you now make in freedom because you don't know the laws of karma are real. No one can prove that they're real. You can believe they're real, but you can't see it unless you have some sense of clairvoyance, and I'm sure some people do, but most people don't. And so now you have this exercise of freedom. So there's a benefit to losing clairvoyance in that you can exercise your self-control because you don't know the law of karma. So are you going to control yourself and restrain yourself because you believe it's the right thing to do? Or are you going to lose control because you don't care and you think there are no consequences? This is an exercise in freedom. This is the universe or our perceptions allowing us freedom. So limited perceptions can increase freedom. The more you know, potentially the less freedom you have. Because if you know the laws of karma, you know how the universe works, and you know you want a certain outcome for your life, you will have fewer and fewer choices. You will see, I can only walk this path if I want this outcome, and I can see it. I see the outcome in the future, and I have to make all of these choices to get to that outcome. So perhaps increased knowledge decreases freedom. I don't know. This is a theory. People think increasing knowledge is in and of itself a virtue. But is it? What good is increased knowledge if it decreases your freedom in this respect? Wouldn't being ignorant be better for your quality of life? In certain respects. Even if it's just for having a better emotional state in the moment, rather than having a desired outcome in the future. Which is better? I don't know. That's up to you to decide, not me. I'm not going to put a qualification on this. You have to determine the value of this yourself. And that, in and of itself, is an exercise in freedom. But how much of this is determined by Big Bang materialism? I think that's a very cynical outlook, and I think if Big Bang materialism, determinism was correct, it might not even be possible to contemplate these things. You know what I mean? But again, determinism is like a cop-out philosophy because they say, you were just predetermined to think that. You were predetermined to have these discussions. And it's essentially useless. And they can just believe that till the cows come home. They can believe in Calvinism, they can believe in determinism, and it's one of those philosophies that you can't argue against because they can just say, you were determined to do this anyway. You were determined to explore this idea. You were determined to have this conversation. And it's useless to think in those terms. Even if it was true, it's useless to think in those terms. But anyway, this is a very wishy-washy topic. Destiny, predeterminism, fate, free will. It's a very individualistic way of thinking, or at least it has to be when you contemplate it. And you have to put your own value judgments on all these different ideas and synthesize them in a way that fits you. Because at the end of the day, what's important for you? Is feeling happy important or not? Is feeling that you are free important or not? And is having an effect on society at large important to you or not? Is society's effect on you important or not? How much of all of these things do you want in your life? What do you want to influence you, and what do you want to influence? I don't know. I have no answer. Like I said, I'm just not old enough to know how free will and destiny will have evolved in my life. When I'm old and gray, I'll revisit this topic with you. But until then, just keep collecting observations about yourself. Find out what stimuli you are exposed to and how you're reacting to them. That's the main thing. That's the first step. And Gurdjieff says it's even the last step. It's just the step. It's the process. That is the process for spiritual power and freedom. Collecting self-observation. Everything else comes from that. So I hope this was useful. I know it was kind of wishy-washy, beating around the bush, but this topic is weird, and there are no definitive answers, in my opinion, not from anybody. Not from the greatest guru or the greatest physicist. I just don't see... This is one of those questions that's just difficult to broach. But it's fun to think about. So have fun thinking about it. Don't drive yourself nuts with this question. And I'll see you next time.